Ranking Member Waxman and their staff for their efforts. Our legislation makes a strong program even stronger by keeping in place regulatory measures that are working and making adjustments to those that don't. I would urge all my colleagues to support this important legislation that increases safety and creates jobs. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Would the gentleman from Pennsylvania clarify whether his motion is to suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended?
As amended.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I rise today in support of H.R. 2845, the Pipeline Safety, Regulatory Certainty, and Job Creation Act of 2011. Pipelines have a critical place in our nation's infrastructure. The national pipeline network of over 2.5 million miles efficiently delivers gasoline, natural gas, oil, and other essential energy products across the country each day. Pipelines play a vital role in our daily lives. Cooking and cleaning, the daily commute, air travel, and the heating of homes and businesses all are made possible by the readily available fuels delivered through pipelines daily. However, because of the volatile nature of the products they deliver, incidents involving gas and hazardous liquid pipelines can and have had serious consequences. On June 10, 1999, a pipeline explosion caused the release of about 237,000 gallons of gasoline into a creek that flowed through Whatcom Falls Park in Bellingham, Washington, in my district. The gasoline ignited and tragically took the lives of two 10-year-old boys and an 18-year-old young man. 8 additional inhalation injuries occurred. A single-family residence in the city of Bellingham's water treatment plant were severely damaged. Wildlife in Whatcom Creek was completely destroyed. This tragedy inspired the 2002 Pipeline Safety Improvement Act. This act increased fines for negligent pipeline operators, improved pipeline testing timelines, provided protection for whistleblowers, and allowed for state oversight of pipeline safety. In 2006, Congress authorized the 2002 law by passing the Pipeline Inspection, Protection, Enforcement, and Safety Act. These acts of Congress have made pipeline safety laws stronger, the construction of new pipelines better, and our existing infrastructure safer. While significant progress has been made in improving the safety of our nation's pipelines, we must remain vigilant. In July 2010, a 30-inch pipeline owned by Enbridge Energy Partners ruptured and released 819,000 gallons of oil into the Talmadge Creek located near Marshall, Michigan. The oil flowed in the Kalamazoo River, a tributary to Lake Michigan. Heavy rains caused the river to overtop existing dams and carried oil 30 miles downstream on the Kalamazoo River toward a Superfund site. Almost a year and a half later, Enbridge is still cleaning up the spill along the river banks. Just a few months after the Enbridge spill, in September 2010, an intrastate natural gas transmission pipeline owned by Pacific Gas and Electric Company ruptured in a residential area in San Bruno, California. The released natural gas ignited, resulted in a fire that destroyed 38 homes and damaged 70 others. As well, tragically, 8 people were killed. Many were injured. Many more were evacuated. The legislation that we're considering today addresses many concerns that were raised as a result of these and other incidents. For example, following the incident in Bellingham, Washington, the National Transportation Safety Board investigators found, among other things, that the Olympic pipeline had no remote-operated shutoff valves on the line, which could have helped prevent the release of hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline. Following the Bellingham incident, the Department of Transportation ordered the pipeline company to install an automatic shutoff valve just downstream of the ruptured location so the volume of product release would be limited in the event of a future pipeline rupture in that area. H.R. 2845 addresses the issue of shutoff valves. It requires all gas and hazardous liquid pipeline operators to install automatic, remote-controlled shutoff valves on new and replaced pipelines. The bill also doubles civil penalties for pipeline safety violations from $100,000 to $200,000 per violation and from $1 million to $2 million for maximum penalties. It requires the Secretary of the Department of Transportation to evaluate and then issue regulations to expand integrity management beyond high-consequence areas, to establish performance standards for leak detection systems, and require hazardous liquid pipeline operators to install leak detection systems that meet such performance standards. It requires pipeline operators, in response to San Bruno, to report to DOT any time their facilities exceed maximum allowable operating pressure, and to conduct tests to confirm the material strength of previously untested gas transmission pipelines in high-consequence areas. And finally, it increases the level of pipeline safety inspectors at DOT by 10 and increases the amount of technical assistance grants that are awarded to local communities from $1 million to $1.5 million annually. H.R. 2845 is a step in the right direction when it comes to pipeline safety. This bill is supported by industry, and is supported by pipeline safety community groups like the Pipeline Safety Trust. I want to thank the chairman and all the committee members for working on this legislation. I want to thank Carl Weimer, who's the executive director of the Pipeline Safety Trust in Bellingham, which formed out of the 1999 pipeline explosion as well, for his continued commitment to these issues. I strongly urge members to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would yield 3 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Upton.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment to H.R. 2845, the Pipeline Safety, Regulatory Certainty, and Job Creation Act of 2011. Enacting pipeline safety this year has been a personal priority of mine and a top priority of the entire Energy and Commerce Committee on a very strong bipartisan basis. This legislation is the product of collaboration between our committee, Energy and Commerce, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and the Senate Committee on Commerce, and reflects consensus across party lines. With it, we make great strides to ensure our nation's energy supplies are transported in a safe manner as possible. And over the last couple of years, several major pipeline accidents have occurred across the country that revealed specific gaps in pipeline safety laws and regulations. It's our duty in Congress to look at these events and determine what we can do to better protect the public and the environment. Among the accidents was a 20,000-barrel oil pipeline spill in a tributary of the Kalamazoo River just outside of my district. The spill forced dozens of families out of their homes, in many cases permanently, caused extensive environmental damage to a waterway that many residents enjoy for fishing and canoeing. Unfortunately, this is not the only major accident in recent memory. September 2010 gas pipeline explosion in San Bruno, California killed 8 people, destroyed 17 homes. Another gas explosion last year in Allentown, Pennsylvania killed 5 as well. And this summer, an oil pipeline buried underneath the iconic Yellowstone River in Wyoming ruptured and sent over 1,000 barrels of crude oil downstream. These incidents highlighted certain shortcomings in our nation's pipeline safety laws, and today we are here to correct that. The legislation before us today often offers historic improvements to the manner in which the federal government regulates energy pipelines. It accomplishes this by strengthening standards in several areas while maintaining the continued economical delivery of vital energy supplies. For these reasons, this bill enjoys the support of a broad array of stakeholders, from the Pipeline Safety Trust to the American Gas Association, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, the Gas Processors Association, and the Association of Oil Pipelines. The bill is months long in the making and could not have been accomplished without the hard work and dedication of a bipartisan group of members. It's a topic many of us take very seriously, as it affected us and our constituents on a personal level. And today, we can say party affiliation and politics have taken a back seat to accomplishing the people's work. And for that, I must offer my heartfelt thanks. Congratulations to the Chairman Emeritus, who's on the floor tonight, of the Energy and Commerce Committee, John Dingell, the ranking member of the committee, who is again on the House floor, Mr. Henry Waxman, the Chairman of the Transportation Committee, John Mica, and the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials, Bill Schuster. Urge all my members to support this legislation. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Speaker, I yield the gentleman from California 3 minutes.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, during the last year and a half, a series of tragic failures has made it clear that we need stronger pipeline safety laws. Pipeline failures have occurred all across the country, from California and Montana to Michigan and Pennsylvania. We've seen natural gas pipeline explosions and ruptured oil pipelines spilling oil into rivers. In July 2010, a crude oil pipeline ruptured near Marshall, Michigan. Over 800,000 gallons of oil spilled into the Talmadge Creek and then flowed into the Kalamazoo River. The river is still being cleaned up. In September 2010, a natural gas pipeline ruptured and exploded in San Bruno, California. 8 people died. Many more were injured. The gas-fed inferno spread from house to house, driven by the wind. 38 homes were destroyed and 70 more were damaged. The explosion left behind a suburban street with a massive crater and burned out vehicles. The Vice Chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board described it as an amazing scene of destruction. This past summer, an ExxonMobil pipeline ruptured in Montana, spilling crude oil into the Yellowstone River. Unfortunately, those are just a few of the major accidents we've seen during the past 18 months. This bill will update and strengthen our pipeline safety laws in the aftermath of these tragedies. In response to the Michigan spill, this bill requires pipeline operators to notify the safety agency of spills more quickly and establishes a process for leak detection standards to be issued for oil pipelines. In response to the San Bruno tragedy, this bill requires key natural gas pipelines to have their maximum safe operating pressure confirmed through records or testing. It also instructs the safety agency to require the use of automatic or remote control shutoff valves so that it doesn't take an hour and a half to stop the flow of gas like it did in San Bruno. I want to acknowledge the work of my colleague, California colleague, Jackie Speer, Representative Jackie Speer, who fought for a strong response to San Bruno, and this bill has been made a better bill by her contributions. In light of the Yellowstone River spill, the bill requires the agency to review its regulations governing the safety of pipelines buried under rivers to ensure they are adequate. The bill includes a number of additional improvements to strengthen our pipeline safety laws. This is a good bipartisan bill that has the support of both industry and safety advocates. The Energy and Commerce Committee, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee worked hard to develop a combined bill that would have broad support. I'd like to thank Chairman Upton, Mica, and Schuster, as well as Mr. Dingell, Mr. Rush, Mr. Rahal, and Ms. Brown for their hard work on this legislation. I encourage all of my colleagues to support this bipartisan legislation.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to just note in the legislation, Section 6 of H.R. 2845 includes a requirement that the Secretary of Transportation provide a person, upon written request, a copy of a pipeline company's response plan. I think it's important to note and point out to my colleagues that these plans often contain security-sensitive information about pipelines' operating characteristics. If this information fell into the wrong hands, it could be a real threat to public safety. In recognition of this threat, we've included a provision that directs the Secretary to redact security-sensitive information. It is my hope that the Secretary ensures that no security-sensitive information is released to the public, and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee will aggressively oversee the implementation of this provision to ensure it is being implemented according to congressional intent. And with that, I'll continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, the Dean of the House and Chairman Emeritus of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 3 minutes.
Speaker, I thank you for recognition. I thank my good friend for yielding. I rise in support of H.R. 2845. This is a bipartisan bill, somewhat a rarity, and the more welcome for that reason. It's going to help instill public confidence in our nation's pipeline safety system by increasing safety standards without overly burdensome actions towards industry. The legislation shows that bipartisanship is possible in this Congress and that we can conduct the business of the American people if we will but sit down and work together. I first want to thank Chairman Upton and Ranking Member Waxman and my friend Mr. Larson of Washington for their hard work. I also want to thank and recognize Jeff Baran and Garrett Golding of the committee staff for their hard work, as well as Greg Sundstrom of my personal staff, who work with great diligence and skill on this matter. Chairman Mica, Chairman Schuster, and Ranking Member Rahal and Mr. Rush also deserve recognition for their hard work, as the two committees have worked harmoniously together to forge an agreement on the final product we have before us today. This inclusive process used in this case is an excellent model of how Congress should move forward on a host of other issues, and I hope that the instructive character of it is accepted by my colleagues. Recent accidents in California, Pennsylvania, Montana, in my home state of Michigan each highlighted serious deficiencies in our pipeline safety laws. H.R. 2845 incorporates the lessons learned in these incidents and strengthens law in the areas of concern. Specifically, the bill expands the integrity management program to improve inspections while phasing out class location requirements, therefore putting stronger safety standards in place while taking steps to remove redundant regulations. The leak detection automatic shutoff or remote control shutoff valve, the maximum allowable operating pressure provisions are a step in the right direction and will do much to improve safety. Pipeline safety is not a partisan issue, but rather is something that impacts all Americans. We have an obligation to protect the American people and the environment from harm while maintaining a system that transports our energy resources efficiently. It's my hope that the Senate will take up this legislation promptly and that the Obama administration will implement these changes in a meaningful way. We will all be watching to make sure that this happens. Together, we've come up with a sound piece of legislation which has support of both industry and safety advocates, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. I would also like to observe, when one of these things lets go, it's quite an event. You will see something that looks a little bit like hell, with the fire and flame and explosion and blast and dead people and scorched automobiles, homes, and the environment. I am delighted to see that we're doing this because we are protecting us both from gas and from oil spills from this and the evil consequences of that. I yield back the balance of my time, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that the other side has two more speakers and a close.
We have two additional speakers and a close.
So if I'll continue to reserve my balance. We have one more speaker than myself, so I'll continue to reserve. And
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the time, and I want to thank Mr. Larson from Washington State for recognizing me and sharing the time with me. Mr. Speaker, I am here to express my full support for this bill, H.R. 2845, the Pipeline Safety, Regulatory Certainty, and Job Creation Act of 2011. Mr. Speaker, this bill represents a bipartisan effort and a good faith compromise by members from both sides of the aisle, from multiple committees, and across both chambers of the Congress. During negotiations on the final bill language, I was very fortunate to have Administrator Cynthia Quarterman of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Agency to accept my invitation to come out to my state and to discuss pipeline safety with representatives from the Illinois Commerce Commission, as well as with officials from Will County, which accounts for a larger percentage of pipelines than any other county in my home state. Mr. Speaker, many of the same serious issues regarding pipeline safety that were discussed in these meetings are addressed in this piece of legislation, and I am very pleased with the final product. Mr. Speaker, I also would like to thank members from both sides of the aisle, Chairman Emeritus of the full committee and Dean of the House John Dingell, Energy and Commerce Chairman Upton and Ranking Member Waxman, as well as the Energy and Power Subcommittee Chairman Whitfield, for working with my office to include language that will require a comprehensive report examining the levels of engagement and participation of minority-owned, women-owned, and disadvantaged business enterprises and contractors involved in the construction and the operations of pipelines in this country. Additionally, this report will look at the methods for facilitating this type of involvement in order to increase the participation of minorities and women in the very lucrative pipeline industry. This study will be a first step in a process to make sure that the builders, the contractors in charge of rebuilding America's aging and expanding pipeline system will represent the variety of groups and businesses that are here in our nation, including those who are most desperate for jobs and economic opportunity. I'm pleased to support this legislation, and I urge all my colleagues to join with me in voting for it.
Has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
At this time, I yield 8 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, Mr. Mica.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 8 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, I thank him for his leadership and helping to guide this legislation and important measure through Congress. I want to take this opportunity to thank folks on both sides of the aisle, Mr. Upton, who chairs the Energy and Commerce Committee, particularly thank Ms. Brown, Mr. Rahal, also Mr. Waxman, and then, of course, others who have helped on the Senate side. This legislation is being done really the way Congress is intended to work, to try to reach a bicameral, bipartisan consensus. We won't have to go to conference. We have worked out some of the issues, and this is not an easy piece of legislation to pass. This is a very important piece of legislation for the American people as far as our energy resources and transporting them safely across the land, as far as an industry that's so important to creating jobs and opportunity and keeping the cost of energy down for men and women, consumers and people who are hit by difficult times right now, looking for reasonable energy costs and keeping the U.S. competitive and providing reasonably cost energy and transporting it safely. This is probably one of the 4 main jobs bills, too, that we will pass from our committee. We have today the pipeline safety legislation. Our committee has also passed the Coast Guard authorization and hoping that we can reach a consensus on that. We have finished and our pre-conference with the Senate, the FAA bill, which is 4.5 years overdue. We inherited that. It was 4 years late, and we are basically finished. A few items that must be resolved by leadership. And then finally, time did not allow us to finish major transportation, sometimes referred to as a highway bill, but this will be more than a highway bill. We plan to have that up as soon as we return. So those are our 4 major pieces of legislation, and this represents, again, a concerted effort by a number of key players in dual committees and in both the House and the Senate. What's important about this is this legislation is it does make some changes, and you've heard from members who've had horrendous pipeline incidents in their communities and their states, and people have lost their lives. There's been extreme property damage, and we have also impacted in a negative fashion the environment. And what we do here in this legislation are some simple things. First, we enhance the inspections. We set standards at better inspections for pipelines. We hold pipeline operators accountable, and that's important. People must be responsible for their actions, and we double the fines. If there is negligence, there will be a penalty to pay because damage has been incurred, and again, we've seen some of the bad results. What we hope for is good results from this. Again, that we can keep energy flowing and provide it for consumers. That's good news for consumers. It's good news for the industry at a time when we should be hiring and employing people in this important energy activity. And it's good news for, again, safe transport and safe jobs in an important industry in our country. So I'm pleased that we've come together. We have, I think, achieved and set an example for the Congress. When Congress's reputation is, very low, and that's giving us high marks. And when people express their disappointment and inability of Congress to act, we are acting. Because this is being resolved without conflict and without again, huge disruption in the congressional process, it probably won't get much attention. But it is, in fact, it is indeed a very important step forward, and I'm grateful for all of those who come together and work and made this an example of how Congress can and should work for the benefit of the American people, and I'm pleased to yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from California.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Washington State for yielding me time. 15 months ago in my district, a gas pipeline exploded and killed 8 of my constituents. 38 homes were destroyed. Many more were severely damaged. Many were victims that sat in burn centers for months, and I visited them. It was a horrific scene. It destroyed that community in so many respects, and yet, like a phoenix, it has risen above it. This bill is really very personal to me because I lived with those experiences with all of those constituents. There are a couple of things that must be said today. The chairwoman of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, said in their final report, "Our investigation revealed that for years the operator exploited weaknesses in a lax system of oversight. We also identified regulators that placed a blind trust in the companies that they were charged with overseeing to the detriment of public safety. As a result of their report, they made 30 safety recommendations, many of them identified as urgent, to address issues in record-keeping, information sharing, pipeline testing. The NTSB report said it highlighted the fact that the problem has been under-regulation, not over-regulation of the pipeline industry. For too long, the pipeline operators have essentially written the rules for their industry." Well, this bill takes a very important step forward in improving pipeline safety regulation, and I endorse it. But there is more that must be done. And ironically, now in California, because of this horrific accident, the residents in California will have better safeguards than any other state in this country because of actions taken by the state legislature and the California Public Utilities Commission that will require moving forward that automatic and remote shutoff valves be placed in high-consequence areas and in seismic areas, not just on new pipeline, and not just on new pipeline that they find economically feasible to place these automatic and remote shutoff valves. This is a key component that was not included in the legislation, and I must tell you, when you saw that ball of fire raging for 90 minutes, an hour and a half, before they were able to turn off the gas, that is something that has to be addressed on a national basis. It's been addressed now in California, and I urge us as we move forward to address it on a national level as well. The NTSB also recommended requiring all pipelines be configured to allow for inline inspection tools, smart pigs. I didn't know what a smart pig was before this happened. I do now. And requiring that older pipelines in particular be subject to smart pigging is critical to make sure that they have not endured corrosion, that they have not been spiked, and the like. So moving forward, I hope that we will take the steps necessary not just to support this measure and to have it signed into law, but it's clear that our work is still not done. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. This gentleman from Washington Reserve.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
We have no more speakers, so I'll continue to reserve and have the gentleman close on his side.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In closing, just let me say a few words. First off, to be sure to thank Ms. Brown from Florida, the ranking member of the subcommittee, as well as Mr. Ray Hall, the ranking member of the full committee on transportation and infrastructure, as well as my colleagues on the majority side of the aisle on the committee, and of course in Energy and Commerce for the work that we all did to make this bill happen. This is the third version of a pipeline safety bill that I personally have worked on going back to 2001. Each time Congress has reauthorized the pipeline safety bill, we have done so by learning lessons from the previous 4 years, incorporating those lessons into the legislation, and taking forward steps to make the use of pipelines and the transportation of fuel, liquid fuel and gas safer. The third thing I just want to point out is that each year, 2002, 2006, and 2011, each year of the passage of a pipeline safety bill, the bills have been bipartisan and garnered much support both in the House and in the Senate. We're likely to see that in the House, and certainly urge the Senate to take this bill up this week and pass it with bipartisan support as well. And finally, let me just say to this body that I would ask this body to urge them to support this bill and to pass H.R. 2845. I want to thank Mr. Schuster for his cooperation in this effort as well. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I thank the Speaker, and I want to associate myself with the words of Mr. Larson. He's really one of the experts in Congress when it comes to pipeline safety, and so it's been a pleasure to work with him on this bill. As I said earlier, I'm very, very proud of the work that's gone into this bill on both sides of the aisle. This truly is a bipartisan agreement, a bicameral agreement, and I think we can all be proud of the product we've produced and look for it to be passed into law, because pipelines are the safest way to move the gas and the hazardous products that this nation needs to fuel the economy. And it's important legislation does. It improves safety, it enhances the reliability, and provides the regulatory certainty so that the owners and operators of pipelines will make the investments in their systems that will create jobs across America. So I urge all my colleagues to support H.R. 2845, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2845? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion is laid on the table. I thought we were taking that as a vote. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.
So the House is gavelled out, but members are expected back at 6:30 Eastern.